Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Amanda Brown, Executive Director of Lagniappe Law Lab, who went from a small rural town in Louisiana to a fellowship in Microsoft and built a statewide justice technology nonprofit from the ground up. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin. I am thrilled today to have on Amanda Brown. She is fantastic. I love her work and following her and all the things that she's into. And she is executive director at Lagniappe Law Lab, which is in New Orleans. Wonderful place. How are you doing?
Incredible and exhausting. I'm tired, but we're recovered. We're back in the office today.
Yeah, and you're mentioning that things kick off again around St. Patrick's Day, right?
Yeah, New Orleans, for all of its faults, knows how to have a good time, and we're just looking forward to St. Patrick's Day festival season until we have to hibernate for the summer.
And well, speaking of summer, you mentioned that, off camera that it's 80 degrees right now in New Orleans, and it's
80.
yeah.
It's thick. It's thick to me.
And I, on the other hand, looking out my window, there were snowflakes falling on just earlier, so I'm very jealous.
It's just a couple thousand miles of a difference.
So you've been doing some amazing work in New Orleans, and we've talked before about, the different ways that you've been kind of jumping into using AI for the right reasons in the right way. And I've just been really impressed by that. You got a newsletter out, Justice in Beta, which everyone watching, you should check it out. It's on Substack. And you've been experimenting a little bit with vibe coding. Can you give us a little teaser about that? Like, well, what are some of the things you've worked on? I know there's been more than one project you've been doing some vibe coding on.
Oh yeah, I think I've accidentally made vibe coding my entire personality now. You can even ask my friend groups. I'm like, I should make an app for that. I'm just having a good time. It really is a vibe of, thinking of problems and processes and things that we want to sort of like formalize, whether that is, creating a stupid bio app where I can more easily share my headshot and bio with people that ask me 1,000 times for it. I'm in the middle of creating sort of a contributory content management process for stakeholders here in Louisiana. I just got off of another meeting and I'm looking at vibe coding a little outreach portal for all of the partners here in Louisiana to sort of track and share resources about how we're doing outreach across the state. So I think it's just been really powerful for me to, if you like translate my skill set to the regular tech world as like a product manager to be able to like do some of these things on my own, it's very powerful and very dangerous. Mostly for me because I keep creating work for myself, but I am having a good time doing it, and I think that's what counts.
Definitely, doing stuff you love and that you find exciting and fun is important because we have a lot to do. But there is one thing that you mentioned that I found that too is that the more stuff we get interested in, the more work we tend to create for ourselves. And I think that's a bit of a danger, with AI is that it like enables you to pursue these things that you may not have normally pursued. And then there's more of that stuff to work on.
Yeah, I actually tell people that I have conversations with about AI that I don't actually think it creates less work. At least that's not my experience. I think technology is not the end all be all. It's an additional layer on top of the core things that we're doing. And so this version of technology, this tool is another layer that we have to think about, designing for, implementing, maintaining, and how that relates to the rest of the stack. Whether that's the physical interactions that people are having up to a paper form, up to a digital form, up to a more interactive AI layer. I think it actually creates more work.
Yeah, no, I think so. I really love that point of view because I've been recently reading Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it really opens your mind to the idea that everything's connected and that a lot of the things that we see as kind of like surface phenomena, like surface events, like this is happening right now. For example, in Los Angeles, there's a problem with homeless, not being housed, and it's a terrible situation that seems to have gotten worse. And it could be that someone sees that and they go, well, people need to get jobs or what have you. And that's just a very like knee-jerk reaction, which isn't fair because it's part of a greater structure, a greater system that makes that possible and sometimes makes it necessary because of other things not being in place to accommodate people and to meet them where they're at. I think you approaching problems that way is a very powerful way of handling these problems and probably only giving us the hope of solving them for real.
I also read that book. I think it was in that book where they talked about the homelessness issue. In some ways, you feel like it's hopeless, and I occasionally feel that way about access to justice. I think it's just one of those like intractable problems that there's so many variables, there's so many inputs that it does feel a little hopeless or daunting sometimes, but it doesn't discourage me from trying and like really trying to gather like and document for myself and for others what are those influences. Everything is kind of pushing and pulling on each other, and how do we document and understand like what those, you know, upstream and downstream effects are of certain people, of processes, of technologies, of all these things. It's really overwhelming at times. And even my board, I can tell that I'm talking to my board members, and they're like, what is she talking about? But there's something there. Like we have to really think of this holistically if we're going to design and create technology systems that don't further entrench problems that exist out there. You know, if we're going to use this as a way to solve and address gaps, it's got to be done thoughtfully, with the bigger picture in mind.
And at bottom, it comes from a motivation that you want to help people because there's a lot of
Exactly.
options in life that you have and what you're doing right now is obviously from a motivation of wanting to help other people. Well, with that, I want to get behind that, like where that came from. And as the audience knows, I love to get into people's business a little bit. So I want to ask you about your origin story and where you're in New Orleans now. Did you grow up in New Orleans?
I did not. No. I do consider myself a Louisiana lifer. That's what tell people. It's my own little prison, but I love it. But I grew up in a very rural part of central northern Louisiana called Vidalia. It's a very small town. I want to say maybe there's like a few thousand people there.
Wow.
Not a lot of industry. There used to be like a jean factory there. There was a Fruit of the Loom factory there at one point. But realistically, like the point on that is I grew up in a very like impoverished rural community in Louisiana. And I do think that that has played like has a major influence on my desire to help people, to contribute to trying to help resolve like certain aspects of people's problems. As soon as I could get out of there, immediately was like, how do I get out of here? No offense, rural life is just not for me. I love walkability. I like the things that cities offer. There are so many rural areas in Louisiana. It's a huge representation state looks like. So I think having that experience definitely plays a role in sort of the way that Lagniappe targets those types of areas across the state as an access problem. But I ultimately ended up I made my way down I-10. Basically, I went to LSU for undergraduate. After bouncing around between like 4 or 5 different majors, probably, I finally got a degree in economics. Went to law school here in New Orleans and have been around ever since.
Was there anybody that influenced you in your life to want to do that? Was there anybody that influenced you? Was there anybody that motivated you towards that?
I think I would say that my grandfather was like key figure for me in really pursuing college, in the way that I did. He made it very clear that like in this day and age, in this economy, you have to go to college. He obviously recognized that like I was a smart person. And so he really pushed me and even my sister to go to college, even though he, didn't even have a high school degree. And maybe that's where that came from.
Yeah.
But he played a major role in just that influence overall. And even in my influence to end up going to law school, ultimately, I do feel like on a very personal level, college was really hard for me. I went in for biomedical engineering. And as soon as I got to a calculus class, I was like, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. I felt really like lost in college, honestly. I didn't have a huge support system. The schools are huge and they're not really great. It's helping people through a very like transformative time in their life. Also struggled with like major depression in college, and I got the swine flu, and that triggered like a major episode for me. I had to like withdraw from school or risk failing out. I partied way too much at an SEC school, as one typically does. So I felt like college was really difficult for me. And I really mean like I barely made it out of there. So I say all that to make it apparent that that doesn't really define me anymore. I think at the time it did, and I was feeling really lost and like unsure of myself, what it is I should be doing. And honestly, I got an economics degree because it was the course load that I had the most credits in. I was like, I can get out of here faster if I finish this up. But I really actually enjoyed it. I think that obviously lends itself to the way that I think now in sort of big macro observational lenses that I have on access to justice. So while it was a challenging time, I did learn a lot about myself. It taught me a lot, and I picked up a lot that I still think is very impactful in the work that I do today.
Well, you made it through. You showed, you had grit and you got through it and you're resilient. And it sounds like you ultimately found your path. I see that reflected in everything that you're talking about, and everything that I've seen you do is that kind of, bigger picture thinking about things. I'm kind of curious though about the step to law school because everyone of us has a different story for that. Like some of us that end up becoming lawyers, like on the one hand, there's some that like when they're a little kid they argued too much and their parents were like, hey, you'd make a good lawyer. Or, I got this, like I fall into this camp where I got a degree in philosophy. What am I going to do with this? I have to make money somehow. So it was more of a practical decision. How was it for you?
I think it was a little bit of coming into life as an adult in economic crisis of the 2008,
Yeah.
era. Okay, well, I'm probably not going to find a job, so maybe I should go to law school. I say that in a cavalier way, but I've had multiple moments in high school and even in middle school and things where like I shadowed judges. I think I always was drawn to like the integrity of the law. Like that's a very core part of my own identity is to just like have integrity and maybe not so much like a law and order, vibe, but I've always been interested in the law as an institution, even if that's not like how I was labeling it, that this concept that there's something bigger than all of us in the form of justice that really is like a pillar of our society. And so that sense of justice, even in my grandfather's farm, I remember one time we were out driving in the fields as we do, and some people had come onto the farm property and destroyed it. And I remember being like this self-righteous kind of teenager, like, somebody should pay for that. That's not right. Like there's this inherent feeling of like, that's not right. There needs to be a way to resolve this like injustice that has happened. And my grandfather, he looked at me and he was like, that's what lawyers do. Like that still sticks with me to this day, this concept of like the law as an instrument for justice. And that's the goal that we all have. And I think the reality of the legal system showed me that that's not always the case. And I really think that that's why, yes, law school was a part of this, but I sort of fell into this access to justice work, but it really aligns with my identity, with what I'm really passionate about, and what I think is keeping the wheels of justice turning is extremely important for our society. There were like little moments like that that led me to the decision to go, but ultimately I found this path by accident. And I'm okay with that. I think life is boring if you have a plan.
A lot of life is kismet and accidents and how things fit together that we don't expect. And that's what makes it interesting, right? It sounds to me like maybe it wasn't totally planned, but you definitely have an innate sense of what's right, what's fair. As you pointed out with that moment with your grandfather. When you went to Loyola University Law School, Was there like a particular part of it that really drew you in? Like, was there maybe a professor there that like really set you on your path towards, access to justice, or was that something that came later?
I do think the culture of the school was very much played a role in that. I went into law school like, well, one, I need a job. I hate to like even embarrass myself by saying some of these things, but it's just the truth. Like I didn't really have a plan. But the culture of Loyola, it's Jesuit, Catholic principles of service to others. I definitely feel that that played a role, and not only just like globally, that's like the sense of the college itself, but the professors, the programming that the school had really like ingrained those qualities into you. So I didn't really know or understand like the magnitude of access to justice gap. I think that is a huge gap in law school curriculum, educating lawyers and potential lawyers about what access to justice is and how huge this need is. But I participated in clinics there, and so you really get to see firsthand. Like these are, folks they have no other options for getting help with their security deposit or child advocacy. All these really important things that clinics were doing demonstrated to me the importance of that. And then I also had the luck of there being a litigation technology clinic at my school. So my clinic experience was firsthand sort of casework and then moving into a technology role and immediately seeing the connection like, oh, I get that there's opportunity and there's value in using technology to scale up some of these services that organizations or clinics are doing. And so that's where the idea was seeded. I got the highest grade in that class. It was just really interesting to me. And then as soon as I moved into practice, even though I was practicing as a regular attorney, I was constantly thinking about how can we could do this better. There has to be a better way, is kind of what I was telling myself. So again, just sort of like blending all these different paths into, I guess, what now is my reality, which I would have never been able to imagine at the time. But those are really the foundational components of how I ended up here.
Tell me more about that tech lab because this was about 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it was. I graduated law school in 2016. Yeah, so it was in my last year of school. It was a litigation technology clinic that was ran by Judson Mitchell. He does a lot of work in like criminal defense and public defender work also, but I think he's sort of like a citizen developer, but he was a developer also, and he had developed like a case management system and other things. He was teaching a course on technology. And so I think in that course, we learned about JavaScript and we learned I knew basic coding from my MySpace days, but we learned about other a little more advanced things and created an API and, learned the lingo and the
Oh,
thought
wow.
processes behind technology. And then I think I created this application that scraped all information about your representatives and automated a way for you to contact them. Just being exposed to the principles of technology and really seeing how the logic of computing very closely maps to the logic of the law in theory. It was a very like eye-opening and fun experience for me.
That's great. And I've experienced that too. There is a lot of overlap. I think that, and that's why tried to encourage attorneys to either learn to code, or at least, try out vibe coding now, is because if you can think of things in a structured way, which you're trained to do, different, then especially now with natural language, what you could tell, an AI agent to do for you. So, okay, so you graduated in 2016 from law school, and then you started Lagniappe in 2019. Right?
Yes.
So you've been highly involved with the American Bar Association. You've been a Next Gen Fellow, and now the Center for Innovation. Um, what's I think that's part of what you were doing during that time. What else were you doing?
Yes. Yeah, so I practiced for one whole year at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. I was doing disaster recovery work there. During that time, I got connected to a project called Flood Proof that the ABA Center for Innovation was working on with Southeast, as well as the Stanford Legal Design Lab. They were developing a software application to help gather information that could help clear title to people's homes so that could be eligible for insurance and public benefits assistance, things like that. But so that's where I was first exposed to the ABA Center for Innovation, which was pretty new at the time, only been around maybe a year or two, and heard that they had a fellowship opportunity. So I applied to that. I was selected as their Microsoft Next Gen Fellow, where I went to work for a brief stint at Microsoft in Redmond, Washington for a year between 2017 and 2018. And during that time, that was like getting thrown into the gauntlet. But the intent was for the project, we were focused on the project that Microsoft was collaborating with the Legal Services Corporation on, which was the Legal Navigator portal. Circa 2017-18, I got really embedded into not just their legal team, which is where I was hosted. And so I did get to see a lot of in-house corporate life, work on some internal tooling and projects there. I was up there for a year, which was really cool. I love the Pacific Northwest, obviously. Working on some internal projects, some AI. This was around the time of like blockchain and like early rumblings of not AI in the way that we have it now, but more developed. So doing things like that, and then working on the Legal Navigator portal project, design teams, engineering teams. That's where I felt like I got thrown into the gauntlet. There's so many acronyms. Corporate speak is insane. It's
Right.
actually insane. Like it took me 4 months to figure out what these people were saying, but it was a great learning experience and it was an incredible opportunity that ultimately let me sort of solidify my one desire to continue to do this type of work, but also give me a little bit of credibility, to be trusted to keep going. And I would say that the folks here in Louisiana have been amazing at giving me a lot of leeway and trust that we will figure this thing out together.
I'm really curious about the leap to start your own thing because it's always a leap of faith. I know that, like I've had my own experience of that and it is scary. Like there's a lot of unknowns. What was it like with you taking on the new role as executive director at Lagniappe? What were some of the things that you had to figure out? What were some of the unknowns that you were dealing with? And what just led to that 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 move?
Yeah, the move was really, it became salient after I did a brief sort of consultancy with the Louisiana Bar Foundation here. So the intent was always for the foundation to support the adoption of that National Legal Navigator portal. And so the cell was like, I'll just, I can come in, I know how it works. I, was involved in the design and development of that. And we had sort of a dearth of resources in Louisiana. So the intent was always to be that sort of support person to help develop or organize, curate resources that would be responsive to the design of that platform. We did that for a while. And as I was working with other stakeholders, gathering this information, looking at other internal things that they were experiencing, realizing there's just a lot of room for this type of work in our state and in a coordinated way. Of course, programs were experimenting with technology. We have two legal service organizations, Legal Service Corporation programs here that were at various points in time receiving funding from TIGs. But, as we look under the hood, you see a lot of people doing a lot of the same things and nobody's talking to each other. So the proposal was, well, I could start a new organization that would help be sort of a centralized, coordinated resource for that, and importantly, dedicated resources. I'm sure as someone that has worked with LSC grantees on TIGs, those folks in those organizations, they have other jobs. Their job is to be a lawyer or to be an intake, manager. It's not to be a product manager or a technologist. So having a dedicated resource to support and put the mental load of that on somebody that could do that regularly, that was the pitch. And so the foundation, they bought into it. I had, of course, worked at Southeast Louisiana Legal Services. I've worked with the law schools. There was enough general buy-in that they could trust that they would at least experiment working with me and see what would happen. And so I'm really, really grateful for that. I don't think I think I've had it really easy, all things considered, because the foundation was willing to fund me. And at first, it was just me, just getting started. So that was a lot easier. But as we've grown, I like to say I'm a terrible executive director. I'm the product person. I'm like, let me be nosy and go see like what do you guys need? I want to do the research. I want to do the design and development work. And as we grow, the executive director role gets a little bit more businessy. I'm not super a fan of that. It's just all part of the bigger mission. Now I have a team under me that can also help. We're really scaling up our ability to do this type of work. So I'm super, super proud of
I mean, it sounds super smart that I agree with you from my experience. Like there's all these different organizations kind of like doing the same thing and you by offering like kind of like a statewide technology department, just
that.
outsource that to us.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then we can project, all of the improvements and learnings that we have to benefit everyone. And I think it is the trait of a good leader that you get into things and understand what people are dealing with. I think that's a good way to connect with people, and as long as you don't make it your job doing their job, it's fine. I want to segue just for a bit about like the things that are in the air right now. You know, we talked at the beginning about you experimenting with vibe coding, which has become very popular now, and it's just a fantastic way that we can all make things. We could build things with technology, and there's less friction to do it. Your Justice and Beta is kind of exploring these issues on your Substack, and as we all know, it's almost like every single day there's something new that's coming out, and everybody's trying to keep up to date, and then at the same time trying to think about how's this going to impact me? I know I'm hitting you with a lot, but the idea is like, what do you think about these things that are going on, and do you think that ultimately it could be a net benefit to what you're doing, or not?
I mean, my initial thought is that I'm overwhelmed. I will be the first person to admit, because I do try to keep up, and it does feel impossible at sometimes to keep up. So I'm definitely overwhelmed. But to the bigger question is, yes, I absolutely think that it's going to be a net positive in in some domain. Maybe there's other pieces that we haven't considered where there are going to be trade-offs for this, right? I absolutely already am like a living testament to the fact that it will, have a positive impact and that just the ability for me to go from one meeting, this happened 1 hour ago. One meeting where of course I already understand the fundamentals. I already understand sort of the core of what we're doing, but being able to go from one meeting and listen to what problems people are having and what it is they actually need and want to I'm looking at a prototype of what I built in response to that conversation right now on my screen. That is
Wow.
it's unfathomable before. Maybe what I would have done, I'll do wireframes and on paper and mock things up, and it'll take a long time to get feedback on that stuff. But I'm a visual person, and to be able to one understand what it is I need and want, and the specific outcomes that I'm looking for, that's the skill that needs to be cultivated in everybody, because you can't build something if you don't know what you want. But then to be able to do that and actually iterate on that and say, no, that's actually not what I want. I changed my mind now. Like that's perfectly fine. But to be able to do that in the span of an hour before I go on a podcast is actually that was impossible before. So it's absolutely going to change the way that we interact with work, with design, with each other. I think that's my thesis is that the technology and the people like they push on each other, and we have to structure ourselves as humans in order to let the technology like organize around us, but that forces our thinking in a way that's really beneficial to the broader system, the bigger picture here. So I know I'm kind of rambling about it, but I think it's a huge leap in our ability to actually organize because we can have these types of structures in place really a lot easier and way that somebody would quote me $30,000 for this, like a year ago. It's just
Right.
the cost has gone down so much. Um, it's really incredible.
I totally agree, of course. And I think that there's more than one kind of cost, right? Organizations and we, tend to focus on the dollar amount, but there's also like the opportunity cost or even like let's call it the enthusiasm cost, because the longer stuff takes to get an idea in front of everyone, that enthusiasm wanes and why are we doing this and all of that. And the ability like you're doing right now to just immediately get it out there, immediately learn from people, like, is this right? And it's never going to be right
Hmm.
the first time. No matter how much time you sink into it, it's not going to be what everyone imagines. So getting that loop going. Um,
Hmm.
sorry, but yeah, I totally am on the same page with you. Um, I think one thing I would love to ask you, and I'm going to ask you is just that there's a lot of people right now that are hearing all this and they're wanting to kind of stick it out. They have a lot of misconceptions about what's going on. I guess what is the biggest misconception that you think people have about AI that you hear and that you would want to set them straight, like to think of it differently?
I genuinely think it's that piece of the earlier conversation we're having about this creating less work for people. It's different work. It's, yeah, it's just a different process, but I still think we have to be mindful of the full stack of what we're doing here. Because it does create extra maintenance type work. And so yeah, I think just the misconception that you're gonna offload everything in your entire life to software. I mean, maybe some people can, but we're in the legal profession, I think we live at the edges of novelty. A lot of things can be automated, they're routine or whatever, but those edge cases is where value of our brain really comes into play. And like that's never going to go away. AI is not good at novelty. It's good at recombining things, maybe making you see different threads, different combinations of things, but it's not good at novelty. And so I'm not putting my money in the basket that like we're all going to go to this, work free lifestyle. That's just a lie. There's a lot of misconceptions about AI, and maybe the biggest one is that anybody knows what's going to happen. We don't. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Don't let Elon Musk tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think any of the experts right now, they're, if they're being honest, they kind of have their hands up in the air too. Like, we'll see where it goes. But, and I think that, you know, people need to be curious, have an open mind, and see how it could actually help them. It's not going to put people out of work because if you just look at like how easily we move the goalposts on what we expect from technology, it's the fact that you're able to do that after a meeting to kind of come up with like a first prototype or even just like an idea that you can embody in code. The thing is what I've noticed with us as human beings is that we get used to that. Then your client might be like, well, why didn't you have it ready within an hour of us meeting? And
Hmm.
then, and so then that just creates more potential work because now you're working on that and making it better. And then there's more projects you could take on because it takes less time. And we find we're just so easily, used to and comfortable with the the new amount of time, the lesser amount of time, the more projects we could do. That I think it's Parkinson's law that whatever time we have gets filled with the work that we have to do.
I mean, the entire human existence is like suffering. I feel like we're always going to be suffering from something. There's always a way for us to apply technology if we're trying to solve a problem, basically. We just move a little bit faster. We're able to move things further along. And we'll see, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. I'm still of the opinion like you have to get the fundamentals right before you start doing this. But the fact that you can do this so quickly, it forces you to think a little bit differently than you would in the past versus a sort of like waterfall approach. I'm like, I'm going to go do all my research right now, and I have to know everything that's going to happen. And then I'm going to create a product requirements document, and you're going to build that exactly to spec. And then somebody's going to come in at the last minute and say, actually, I need that thing. And I'm going to have to go back to a developer and they'll say, that's $15,000. Like this process,
Yeah.
it's just totally different now.
I think if we look back on the history of humanity, it's not like there's a problem solved, we're done.
Exactly.
All right, let me ask you the two questions I ask of all my guests. First one is because obviously you got a lot of irons in the fire. How do you keep it balanced? Is there such a thing as work-life balance?
I think I do actually have pretty good work-life balance. I come to work at 9, I leave at 4:30, or some days if I'm feeling, like I really want to go to the gym early or something, I box my time in a way that to the best ability that I don't let that bleed over, giving me time to make sure that I'm spending time with friends and family and taking care of myself and, doing other things that fill me up in a way that lets me come to work as my whole self in a way that can accomplish the things I need to get done. Is it perfect? Do sometimes I still stay up until 11 o'clock because I have a deadline? Of course, it happens, but I believe that it is possible. It's just a matter of when I come to work, I'm focused on work. I think I'm also in a position where I get to say nobody's going to die if I don't get that prototype out the door today. It could be tomorrow. It's okay. So I'm privileged in that way. But I think having the work-life balance is the only way that I can be able to produce at this level.
Well, related to that, and I think that's, by the way, great words of advice to anyone. Like, you got to take time for yourself, got to take care of yourself. You can't just show up drained of everything. And so, like, taking some time out for Mardi Gras is a good a good thing. Well, but leading to the next question is, what makes life fulfilling for you? Like after doing all of these things, what makes it worthwhile for you?
I think again, I, I can't overstate how like privileged I feel to be able to do work that connects to me at like my soul level. I just really love this work. I think it's really important. I love all the people that I get to interact with, like you, like all of our friends online. It's this feeling of actually contributing to something greater that is really meaningful to me. And so I just feel so lucky that I get to do this work and somebody pays me, they pay me to do it and people trust me to work with them to try and figure out some of these problems. I can't really overstate how lucky I feel to have the opportunity to do that. And I'm excited every day even on the hard days to get up and do that work. But as I mentioned, it's restricted. I focus on it when that's, important. But I have to, of course, make time for my friends. And I love traveling and having the ability to run. And I love to go to the gym and read and all these things. Weirdly enough, I know I feel like I sound like a freak sometimes when I say that, but like I learn something about access to justice anytime I'm doing other, I'm traveling and I'm like, let me stop by their courthouse or, how does this legal system work? Always looking for opportunities to learn from other cultures and activities and systems and how those systems exist in the world and like what I can take over to my work here. So making time for that is really important to creating new connections for me in this work.
I think it's wonderful how that thread of the mission is in everything and it becomes more enriching from that.
I'm always on a little scavenger hunt, for, what could this possibly mean? How can I extrapolate what I'm learning here into access work and ultimately helping people? That's really the goal.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today and sharing your story.
Thanks for having me. It was really fun.
One question for the audience I want to ask you, and I think it kind of ties in. Lagniappe stands for.
It's the magic of a little something extra. So,
Yeah.
in early days, it was technology is extra. I don't think it's extra now. I think it's actually essential. But in the early days of Lagniappe, we are just a little something extra for, the service delivery system here. It has evolved, but I do think it's magic. And sometimes I say I'm a little extra.
Well, I do think in a good way that you bring a great something extra to access to justice in our community. And I'm really happy that you're able to join us today and to learn more about you. And for anybody watching that wants to learn more about you, Amanda, or Lagniappe, how can they do that?
You can follow Justice in Beta on Substack. You can also check out our website, lagniappelawlab.org. And if you want to see our main product, that's like sort of our distribution hub, you can go to louisianalegalnavigator.org.
Well, it sounds great. But Amanda, thanks again for being on. And thanks to all of you for watching. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.